Good evening and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery for another session of Monk Chat, your weekly opportunity to ask random Dhamma questions to a panel of Buddhist monks. This evening we have with us Ayya Brahmavara, the wonderfully delightful British-Irish bhikkhuni. To my left we have Bhante Sanata Vihari, the also delightful bhikkhu, and myself, the somewhat less delightful Bhante Sudaso.
Delightful.
And we'll be answering whatever questions you might have. So if you would like us to answer your questions, please type them into the chat window and we will answer them as we see them. Note that we prioritize questions rather than comments. So please make sure you phrase things in the form of a question if you want to make sure that we get around to it in a timely manner. And we'll go ahead and start with paying homage to the Buddha, and then we'll see if there's any questions and take it from there. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Okay, and welcome to the people who are checking in so far. So welcome to Spook, Louisa, Rick, Dharma Learner, Manol, Jay, Karuna, Yankee, and Jayanta. Welcome to Monk Chat. And Mary, hello Mary, I hope your husband is doing better. And Suzanne, good to see all of you. And we have one question so far. So we'll start with this one question, and I highly encourage others to also add questions so that we can have a flourishing discussion. So first question here is from Louisa. So Louisa says, is it normal for practice to fluctuate? I was very skillful for so long, but have found myself doing some unskillful things and subject to aversion lately. I'm committed to improving. Ayavi, what do you think?
This is very good. It's very good to notice how, when we start meditating or practicing whole life practice, we can notice that we can have a sense of progress, and we can feel calmer and sweeter and nicer and more friendly and less angry. And then, whoomph, all of a sudden, things can change and something can happen and we're reacting. And we can feel, this is even worse than before I started practicing. I'm more angry, I'm more upset, things are going worse, and I'm also creating more harm. I'm not as good a person as I was. And this is a really common perception actually amongst people who practice, because we're noticing more how our behavior goes, how our minds are. And honestly, it can feel like, 3 steps forward, 4 steps back, a couple of steps forward, 5 steps back, 1 step forward, and so forth. But the truth is that we are making steady, gradual progress. It's just that subjectively, it can seem very differently. The path doesn't seem straight subjectively. It's quite meandering. It's quite zigzag. It's a roller coaster ride sometimes. But we can be sure that, if we apply the Buddha's teachings and we do our best, we're trying, we have good intention, in short. We're intending to live a wholesome life. We're intending to be harmless. And we're developing mindfulness. We're developing our meditation practice. Then we're bound to go from good situation to an even better situation. Or you say dark situation may feel sometimes darkness into a brighter situation. But it's actually really good to feel that I'm making no progress. I have this and that flaw that I didn't have before, this and that fault. I'm much more short-tempered and so forth, because what's actually happening is that we're getting more insightful around the way that the mind is, the way that we are expressing our humanity in this life. And it's great to have more insight. And there's also the kind of suffering that can come with that the Buddha called spiritual suffering, where we're actually suffering because we have a high standard for ourselves and we're not able to meet that standard right now. But the crucial point is that to have a high standard means we're moving in that direction, and you'll surely be moving in the right direction. So just keep going. Watch the mind, watch the critical mind. Just keep letting go of any critical, judgmental thoughts and keep developing on the path, and you're bound to appreciate good results over time.
Great, thank you very much. And Rick asks, how much energy should we put into creating external conditions that support meditation and daily life practice? How do we know when we are demanding too much? Bhante Sanatavihari, what do you think?
Yeah, it's very important to the extent that you can, and it's reasonable and within your means, to create the necessary conditions or skillful conditions around you. You don't want to try to go to meditate, in a very hostile environment, a loud environment, a dangerous environment. You don't want to create unnecessary obstacles for your practice. So to the extent that you can remove or lessen those obstacles, you should. Don't make practice any more difficult than it already is. There's a lot we have to struggle with. So we don't want to just kind of bring in more problems and more obstacles into our practice. So in the same way that we try to remove the obstacles in our mind, we also, to the extent that we can in the physical world, try to remove or at least be away from those obstacles for the time that we're practicing. So in the beginning, it's actually very useful to find a place that's ideal for meditation and ideal for practice. And as you progress, then maybe you can expose yourself to a little bit more obstacles and external adversities, and maybe you can just practice wherever you go. It doesn't matter. The mind is unperturbed at that point. So, but yeah, definitely do what you can within your means.
Great. And Hai Young asks, how do we train our mind to let go of attachment to our loved ones that prevent us from renouncing, especially at the moment of death? Well, first off, I wouldn't worry too much about the moment of death, because what's much more important is what you're doing the rest of the time, because what you're doing the rest of the time is what will prepare you for the moment of death. So as for attachment to your loved ones, well, it's good to recognize that attachment to loved ones has wholesome components to it, which are the components of compassion, of kindness, of consideration, of thoughtfulness, of generosity. Those are all good qualities. Those are actually really wonderful, praiseworthy qualities. The problem is that we restrict it to specific people. And those specific people we restrict it to, it's because they have some connection to our sense of self. So the solution then is not necessarily to try to eliminate the attachment to your loved ones per se, but rather to universalize the wholesome qualities there. So instead of fixating just on kindness and compassion and generosity and thoughtfulness only for my loved ones, instead we try to cultivate a universal compassion, a universal metta, universal consideration. So actually doing the practices of metta and karuna, of wishing may everyone be happy without exception. May everyone be free of suffering without exception. And this just takes away that limiting factor. So of course we still want our mom to be happy, we still want our sister to be happy, we still want our best friend to be happy. That's all perfectly wholesome and good. But it's the restriction that we place on it. Well, I only want my dear ones to be happy and everybody else can go jump off a cliff for all I care. That kind of attitude is the problem. So we want to take that wholesome heart that we've been cultivating towards our loved ones and make it universal, applicable to everyone. And in this way, then the mind will stop being fixated on specific people. So then we actually can recognize that the specific people in our lives are subject to arising and ceasing. They're subject to changing. They're subject to passing away. They're subject to coming in and out of our life. And we're subject to going in and out of their life. And we also start to get a broader view of things. So this is another place where reflecting on the rebirth process is really important. So for example, the person who's currently your mother. Well, this is not the first time you've known her. You've known her in many, many previous lives as well. And it's also not the last time you're going to know her. In fact, the nature of samsara is that we just keep running into the same people over and over again. Over and over and over and over again. So you actually never lose anyone. You just kind of lose contact with them for a while. Kind of like when you have a good friend and then you just lose touch with them. And then 10 years later, they find you on Facebook or something. And it's just like, oh, it's you. I remember you. We used to be friends 10 years ago. How are you doing? Well, it's the same. Like you lose touch with somebody for 10 or 20 lifetimes, and then you bump into them in some distant life, and you're like, oh, I don't know you, but somehow I already know you. And that's because you do already know them. So this also kind of removes the whole problem with attachment to loved ones, because you're like, yeah, okay, yeah, my mom's going to die and I'm going to lose touch with her for a while, but I'll run into her again in some future life. We might have different bodies, we might have different personalities, but we'll meet again one way or another. So you never really lose anyone in samsara. You never really lose anyone. You just, sometimes you're in touch with them and sometimes you aren't, and it's always shifting and changing. So you don't actually need to worry about losing people, because it actually doesn't work that way. So those are a few thoughts about how to deal with this. And Dharma Learner says, I find my chest area contracting when thought of anxiety arise. It then disrupts my sitting until the thoughts perish. Why is there physical sensitive when these thoughts arise? Ayabi, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's really wonderful to notice how in our meditation practice, we start to recognize how thoughts and feelings are connected, and with every thought there'll be feelings that one could observe in the body, and it's good to observe those feelings. And actually a lot of the meditation practice is around noticing thinking and just returning to actually being present, feeling the body, being embodied. What is it to be here? What is happening in this moment? And thoughts come and go within this process, but it's really helpful to give more attention to the sensations, to what's actually happening in the body. So when you have that feeling in your chest of constriction and the association there with anxious thoughts, this is not an unfortunate thing. This is not actually disturbing your meditation. You can say this is your meditation, because this is what arises in the moment. And it may be a pattern for you, that this kind of anxiety comes up and the chest tightens and it feels like something in a way you're not able to practice. But actually let this be your practice and see if you can work with it patiently. So just to feel what's happening in the body, to feel that tightness. And if it becomes very overwhelming when you're paying attention to the chest area, okay, you can just see what's happening in the hands. Just feel your body sitting. Feel the weight of your body. So you can, in different ways, you can move the attention around the body so it's not just focused on that very difficult feeling. But then from time to time, you can come back to that feeling and just breathe into it. Take a deep breath and feel, what is it? What is this tightness? Where is it? How is it changing? And so forth. So important point really is to recognize that whatever comes up for us in our meditation practice, that is the meditation, and we can work with it. You can work with anything, and we can notice as part of that how the mind will try sometimes to get away from things, or will have wishes that this will end, trying to, in a way, fight with reality. And this then also is part of the meditation practice. See how aversion arises in relation to the feeling in the chest, which is in relation to the anxious thoughts, and just see how the whole thing plays out. And what really helps to anchor one in awareness is to come back to the present moment, come back to the body, and to let the thoughts be held very lightly. Don't give them any importance. No need to investigate the thinking when we're meditating, just to feel the effects and to rest the attention in the body so that the mind can actually find its own way to peace, which it will do. You know, if we roll around in the thinking, we'll tend to get more agitated. But if we leave the thinking alone and stay with those difficult physical sensations, what generally will happen is relaxation. Things will relax. The feeling in the chest can relax, and the thinking can also relax and slow and ease, and then some degree of relaxation, of peacefulness can manifest. But this is to be experienced, each one of us, for ourselves. The most important point really is, don't feel that anything isn't meditation, and don't feel that any physical experience is a problem. It's not. It's an opportunity to deepen the awareness and to be present for whatever's arising. Let's remember the first noble truth of dukkha. The Buddha said, we're going to experience a lot of unsatisfactory things. We don't need to make a problem out of that. The only problem with unpleasant feeling in the body is that we don't like it and we're trying to get away from it. So to learn through practice, you can learn how to be with whatever's happening and not to make a problem about it. And I can guarantee that your anxiety, the feeling in the chest, it will be changing, it will be evolving, different things will be happening. Just keep steady, stay steady with it, and let it be your meditation practice. So I hope that's helpful.
Great, thank you very much. And Anonymous has a simple question. Can you eat fruits as an allowable or just fruit juices? Bhante?
Yeah, so this is for people observing 8 precepts, 10 precepts, and monastics. So yes, no solid food. Juice can be different in different places, depending how coarse or how much pulp there is in there. So usually if you want it as diluted as possible, that's still kind of been my general rule. But as for me, I really don't take anything in the evenings, but juice is perfectly allowable in most places, as long as you don't make it into like a smoothie or try to sneak it into making it food somehow, because people can get very sneaky once they're hungry. So that's one thing to keep in mind.
Yeah. And Julie says, what did the Buddha say about callings? Are these always delusions, like really wanting, or can they be real to work on Dhamma, for example? Well, actually, what comes to mind for me is I remember many years ago meeting a man who had been on a very long solitary meditation retreat, so lasting many, many months. He was doing solitary meditation for many months. And then one day he ended his retreat and he was going to head back out into the world and get a job and start doing ordinary lay life again. And I remember asking him why. And he said, because during his meditation, he kept thinking about gardening. And eventually he decided that this must be some like serious vocation. Like he just really, really had to stop being a hermit meditator, and he really had to have a garden. And in order to have a garden, he needed to make money so that he could afford to get all the gardening stuff set up properly, just the way he was imagining it during his meditation. And I remember thinking, what a tremendous waste. First off, that he was wasting all his time, meditation time, fantasizing about gardening. And second, that he was breaking his retreat in order to chase after his craving, because that's what that is. 99% of the time when we have a strong calling, it's just a strong desire. It doesn't have any karmic importance. It doesn't have any spiritual significance. It's just we really want to do something. And we're trying to justify really wanting to do something. So in his case, he really wanted to do some gardening. I saw him again a couple years later, and he was impoverished and miserable. So his vision of perfect happiness coming from having a garden apparently didn't work out so well. But once in a rare while, we do have this strong sense of something that we feel we should be doing with our life. And in that case, again, closely examine it and examine, is this wholesome? Is this in line with the Buddha's teachings? Because sometimes that's real. Usually it's, for example, people who have a really strong calling to monastic life. That's not to be neglected. Or they have a really strong calling to do some kind of compassionate service work, like a strong calling to do disaster relief or to do medical service of some sort, things like that. So that also can be real because that's something which has spiritual potency. So that's the main guideline I would encourage, is to examine, is this actually something which is wholesome and spiritually beneficial and which points towards awakening? Because otherwise, again, most callings, they're just about latent desires and attachments and cravings. It's not about anything real. And Rachel says, similar to the question about attachment, how do I work on fear of my son's suffering? Especially as I age, he's disabled. I can accept some of my own suffering and change, but not his. What do you think?
Yeah, it's very poignant for us, isn't it? That, it's in many ways so much easier to bear our own suffering and just to be equanimous with that than to see someone else suffering or to fear someone else suffering in the future, because there's a powerlessness, a feeling of what can I do to prevent that? Well, maybe I can't prevent that, and how painful that is, how much, especially those really dearest to us, we want them to be well, we want them to be happy and free from suffering, and we can't make that happen. So this is very poignant for us, and it's a bit like, Bhante was saying about how important it can be for us to try and open the heart wider so that we're not so fixed on particular individuals, simply for our own good. To broaden the view means to suffer less. Any one particular dear person. But I can really appreciate in your situation that we're talking here about your child who needs you and who's depending on you, who has some disability. And this is particularly challenging in a way, and also a great opportunity, because the attachment will be there, the protective instincts will be very high, and the wish to care for and tend to this person is your practice, of course, and it's a beautiful practice, a very high, noble practice. To care for another human being is a great way for us to develop, isn't it, as human beings ourselves? And so there's a lot of wonderful opportunity there also then to work with the attachment, which is the painful part, the part where you're only wanting to be able to control the universe so that this one can be well at all times, be happy at all times, and seeing that this isn't possible. And I feel that what we can do is, one can practice with the feelings and bring up, the image of your child, or sit and look at your child and meditate and feel how it is to regard your child and how you actually feel in relation to your child. And you can also consider, if anything happens, how will that feel? And to sort of prepare oneself and to observe within ourselves the degree of attachment that we're holding and how it actually feels. And to work in this way is really helpful, because it's like a death contemplation, for instance, when we are invited by the Buddha to consider our death and really seriously give thought to how it will be and what will happen to this body, then there can be resistance to that, but actually we're facing the suffering that's already there, and we're working with it, and we're enabling ourselves to do a lot of letting go before the death event happens. In the same way with your child, you can prepare, you can practice, contemplate, and really feel this attachment and all the worries and concerns that you have as you're getting older, and will be less able to care for your child, to consider all of the thoughts and feelings around that, and just to sit with them, and just allow them to inform you. And wisdom will grow, compassion will grow, and also the letting go will be able to happen. And this isn't, of course, letting go of care, letting go of love and compassion for your child. It's letting go of the painful bond that creates so much suffering and anxiety. And we can see, as we practice with the feelings and emotions in relationship, we can see what is to be let go of and what can be cultivated. It becomes very clear for us. The mind will automatically, naturally let go of the dukkha, let go of the unwholesome, rather, let go of the attachment that creates pain and suffering, and it will develop the good qualities that will see you through your beautiful life of care and compassion for this child that you've been given.
Okay, and there's another one here that's for you, but I think we'll come back to that after we've taken a couple other ones.
Okay.
So Haiyang says, I have a friend who has been compassionately helping sick monks for the past 30 years. However, he still gets angry easily. May I know why a compassionate person constantly helping sick monks still behaves like this? How can he overcome this angry attitude that arises easily when provoked? Bhante?
Yeah, so we have to remember that we all still have moha. We're all delusional. We're still troubled by lobha, dosa, moha, unless you're an arahant. So we can't expect someone to be perfect, even though externally they're showing a lot of compassion. Actually, this is telling us how much this person is actually working towards overcoming their anger. Maybe they're very aware of their anger, and this compassionate practice of helping monks is his way of practice. Is his practice to overcome his anger. So instead of seeing it like as a person who is very compassionate, but at the same time, why are they very angry? You can see it, a person who's very angry has recognized their anger. So they're being very compassionate in order to overcome their anger, right? Oh, wow, that's so amazing. Most people wouldn't do that, They wouldn't even recognize it or try to do something to combat their anger. So we can actually, instead of looking at their shortcomings, praise them for doing something to actually help them overcome their shortcomings. So that's kind of my perspective, to see a person who's dedicated that much. I mean, they've probably been working with anger for this entire life and many previous lives, and they're the person who knows they have a stain, right? Like in the simile of the stains, he knows he has a stain, and he's working towards overcoming that stain, that defilement. So actually, I would say sadhu sadhu to that person for doing the work to actually do something to overcome their anger.
Yeah. And Julie asked, did the Buddha offer an explanation as to where thoughts come from? When you have less thoughts, we pick on the thoughts of others, for example. Well, and the Buddha said that thoughts also are not self. They're impersonal. They're just an aspect of nature. So where do thoughts come from? Well, they can come from many different sources. Sometimes they come from memories, including memories from previous lives. Sometimes they're echoes of things that we hear from other people, or things that we hear from mass media, or that we see in the world around us. Sometimes they actually are things that we fabricate on our own. So we do have the ability to create thoughts, to generate thoughts. Sometimes it's the subconscious process, which processes information and comes up with more mental noise for us. So there can be lots of different sources for thoughts. And yes, it is also possible to pick up on the thoughts of others. That is something that can happen. But for the most part, actually, it's the majority of thoughts are just useless noise. And this becomes increasingly clear the more we practice meditation, the more we realize that a lot of thoughts are, again, they're just worthless noise. And also, most of it is not anything we're actively doing. It's just objects passing through the mind. Because one thing I find really fascinating is that the Buddha spoke about thoughts as being external objects perceived by the mind, in the same way that a sight is an external object perceived by the eye, a sound is an external object perceived by the ear, and so on. In the same way, thoughts are external objects perceived by the mind. So thoughts can be thought of as being outside of ourselves. So they tend to feel more personal than most other sensations, but they're just as impersonal and external as any other object of awareness. So I find that also very helpful. So, for example, sometimes when people are reflecting on their own mind, they start to see these really awful thoughts. And then they think, oh, I am a terrible person because I have these awful thoughts. But that's kind of like if you're walking through town and you see somebody getting beaten up, and then you think, oh, I'm a terrible person. It's like, no, you're not a terrible person. You just saw something terrible. Well, the same way, you're sitting there in meditation and this thought appears of beating somebody up. Well, that doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just means you became aware of something unwholesome. So as long as you're not actively producing that thought, it isn't you, it isn't yours, it isn't your karma. It's just something which comes and goes. So when you take this attitude, then the thoughts just aren't a problem. And they come and go in their own way, and there's nothing to worry about. So now we can go back to this question for Aya Brahmavara, who says, Aya Brahmavara, what causes us to feel like we are floating 6 inches above the cushion when entering deeper meditation? What causes the body to seem to disappear when entering deeper samadhi?
I guess you could say it's the perception that causes that to happen. I mean, one's perception can change. As we meditate, the body can start to feel all sorts of different ways. And I think the important thing is to, just recognize all sorts of things can happen and not to give them too much importance, because, people can sometimes feel like they're levitating, or the body's disappeared altogether. And it's important in a way to not hold on to even these perceptions are to be let go of. And it can actually be quite helpful if you do have the feeling that you're floating above the ground, just to open your eyes and have a look. And most likely you'll see that you're actually sitting on the mat. If not, let us know. And equally, if you've lost all sense of sensation in the body, and you feel that that's a perception that the mind is holding, okay, just open your eyes again and see where you are and where the body is. And of course, when we're practicing samadhi, getting a very focused, one-pointed mind, the sense of body can become very slight or even disappear altogether. In those situations, the perception of the body also goes. So it's not like it's an issue for us. It's simply the mind turning away from the body. And so there's a difference there. What one is then really focusing on is whatever the object of meditation is, whether it's the breath or whether it's a kasina, some object, whatever it may be, one would be in that situation fully focusing on that object. The sense of body may completely disappear, but it's not an issue, because all you're doing is focusing and enabling the mind to become more and more one-pointed. But if you're sitting and your practice at this point in time is to observe the body, and the body disappears, then you want to check, am I still here? Yes, I'm still here. And see what you can feel. Like work with something very coarse, like the weight of the body or the temperature in the room, or take a deep breath and feel that breath and come back into awareness of the body. So there are these two kinds of meditation. There's a meditation of samadhi where you want to focus on one object and give it all your attention and allow whatever needs to happen. And that will mean nothing else really registers anymore. There's just the object of meditation. And then there's Vipassana meditation, insight meditation, which in many ways is much more useful for us if we want to purify our hearts. And when we're practicing insight meditation, we want to be very aware of the body, and we want to keep developing that awareness. So I hope these thoughts are helpful for you, and come back if you have more questions about this.
Great. And Manal asks, in the Theravada tradition, is there an understanding that there were other Buddhas before Gautama Buddha, or was there only one? Would you please elaborate on this further? Bhante?
Yes, in the Digha Nikaya, we get an example of how the Buddha talks about a previous Buddha in the past, and I think there's where we get the example of like the Bodhisattva. So that's one occasion where I see it directly in the text, but then later in the tradition, we get to all the other Buddhas. I'm not sure if they're all in the suttas, all the 28 Buddhas with the previous that the Buddha mentioned. So there is a very long tradition of holding many Buddhas in the past, and also I think one mention of the future Buddha, Maitreya. So there is this kind of idea of multiple Buddhas, and countless Buddhas. These are probably the only ones that we're aware of, that our Buddha, Sakyamuni Buddha, shared with us. But who knows? When the Buddha recounts his previous lives, he goes countless, try to go back and stop going back. So at that point where he stopped going back, who knows what was going on back then? And to the future, also countless, right? So basically, we can say infinite Buddhas, countless Buddhas. So yes, the Buddha multiverse.
Yeah. And HPD asks, what is the point of reciting sutras? How often should they be recited? Well, the main point of reciting sutras is to remember the teachings of the Buddha. So when we recite suttas, which in monasteries commonly every day this is done, when we recite suttas, well, first and foremost, we're remembering the Buddha's teachings, reminding ourselves of the teachings. And commonly the suttas which are chanted regularly are about central and important topics in the Buddha's teachings. And another important thing is that they help us to bring up a sense of faith and devotion. So in reciting sutras, there's that sense of direct connection to the Buddha, which again builds up a sense of faith and devotion towards the Buddha. And actually a very useful function of chanting suttas, it's actually mentioned in one of the suttas of a monk who memorized a bunch of suttas and chanted a bunch of suttas when he was alive. And then when he passed away, he was reborn as a deva. And at first he forgot about being a monk, and he was just focused on enjoying deva life, which is totally understandable. But then at some point he heard a human monk chanting suttas, and the deva remembered, oh, that sounds familiar. I think I used to do that too. Oh, I used to be a Buddhist monk in my past life. And the deva's like, oh, well, even though I'm a deva, I can still practice the Buddha Dhamma. And the deva resumed his practice of Buddha Dhamma. And it was because of chanting suttas as a human that he was able to remember his practice and continue in his next life. So that's another important benefit to chanting suttas, is it helps to keep us connected to the Buddha Dhamma in our future lives as well. There's a few other things. So it's generally believed in Buddhist tradition that when we recite suttas, that the Buddhist devas who hear that will become joyful and happy, and will be more likely to hang around wherever we're living, and more likely to watch over us and protect us and give us a little boost of good luck every now and then. So that's also a commonly believed perk to reciting suttas. There's a few other good things. It can also be a great way of focusing the mind. So you've been spending your day thinking about all kinds of random junk, as people normally do. And then you sit down and you focus on just chanting some suttas for a period of time. And you'll find that you have to actually really focus on what you're doing, or else you'll start spacing out and skipping words, or getting off track, especially when you're chanting in a group or when you're chanting together with a recording. It's really noticeable when you space out, because you'll get out of sync with everybody else, or out of sync with the recording. So I do recommend, if you're chanting suttas, then to chant in a group or chant together with a recording if possible, because that also helps to make sure that you're staying focused and on track. Those are a few benefits I can think of. Let's see what the next question here is. Okay, so Dharma Learner says, do any of the Venerables have a suggestion for handling a family member who is wondering why following the Buddhist path is attractive to a Western lay person? I thought exposure to the monastery would be helpful. It was not. I became doubtful of my decision to share with them. Well, maybe we could each say a little bit about this. But just one thing I do want to first say is, why do they think there's anything different about being a Westerner? So Buddhism is universally applicable. So it doesn't matter what country you're born in or what culture you're from. Buddhism applies equally to everyone. It's not only for people from particular countries or particular cultures or particular parts of the world. It's for everyone. It applies to everyone. So the question is rather, why is it attractive to you? That's probably more what they're wondering. So you can explain to them exactly why it's attractive to you. As for bringing them to a monastery, well, if you want them to have a better sense as to why Buddhism is attractive to Westerners, then you would need to bring them to a monastery that has Western monks. And this is often the case for people who don't quite understand, have them meet Western monks. And that will help them understand why Westerners are interested in Buddhism, because we usually have very detailed explanations for exactly why we're really into this Buddhism thing. Those are a few thoughts. Do either of you want to add something?
Yeah, I think it's really great that you took them to the monastery and that you're sharing with them about your spiritual practice and your aspirations and all, because it's really kind to share with those that, you know, who care for us and who we're close to in life. So I think it's really lovely that you did that. And also it's not, you know, so uncommon for, you know, we could probably all tell stories about this, you know, people not actually being as interested as we would hope. You know, it means so much to me, this practice. I tell my friends, my family about it, and it doesn't necessarily mean very much to them. And I think the thing is just to, you know, we can make peace with that. It's like we're all different, and some people have an affinity, like we were saying in the last question, you know, maybe some very natural affinity, some karmic affinity with the teachings of the Buddha. And for other people, it doesn't immediately strike them as the most wonderful thing they've ever come across. I find that very difficult to comprehend myself, you know, but it's just the way. You just see how people are actually not interested. And to be able to make peace with that and maintain that relationship and not be afraid to continue to share. But, you know, we can recognize how much to share, and sometimes it's not that much. People won't be that interested, but occasionally there might be something that you might feel that person could relate to, and then you could share that with them. But I think, as Bante said, to bring them along to meet Western monastics would be a nice thing to do, because we're quite normal and we can relate, you know, in a way, because most of us none of us here were born Buddhist. We weren't educated as Buddhists, and so we can understand that sense of what's all that about? What are these monks wearing those clothes for? Why are they shaving their heads? Why do they have all these weird customs and so forth? We can all relate to that and speak about that with your relative.
Yeah. Anything you want to add, or is that sufficient? Okay. And Kruna has a question about Pali, so I think I'm actually the most qualified person to answer this one. So Kruna says, did any of you study Pali with the goal of understanding it on hearing? When you hear an unfamiliar spoken passage or chant, can you understand it on hearing like a spoken language? As my class moves through increasingly difficult material, I find I'm not retaining case declensions and conjugations from previous weeks. I suspect it might not be skillful to study it like a living language. So there's a couple things in here. So first off, did I study Pali with the goal of understanding it on hearing? No. My goal from the beginning was to read the suttas in Pali. So that was my goal. I accomplished that goal. As a side effect, when I hear an unfamiliar spoken passage or chant, if it is pronounced very clearly and accurately, which is part of why I'm obsessive about correcting people's Pali pronunciation, if it's pronounced clearly and accurately, then yes, I understand what they're saying. So with some exceptions, like some of the rare poetic forms of things in Pali are quite hard to understand if I don't see them written. And even in written form, sometimes they're a bit murky. But if it's standard Pali, pronounced clearly, then yes, I usually understand what's being said. But that's a side effect of having learned how to read Pali. It wasn't my intention. As for not retaining declensions and conjugations, I would say don't worry about it because it is soaking into your subconscious mind. So the important thing is to just keep studying and practicing and learning and continuing, and your subconscious mind will become increasingly saturated in the language. So the important thing is not retention, but persistence. And over time, persistence leads to retention, in my opinion. And once you have a sufficient basis in grammar, start reading suttas in Pali, because that is what will really make the biggest difference. But yeah, next time you're at the monastery, we can talk in person about Pali studies. Needless to say, it's something very dear to my heart. So we have an anonymous Facebook user here who's asking a question which I don't quite understand. Is it right to see that each so-called absorption can be achieved using a limitless expansion of our own heart-mind? Absorption meaning the attainment of the 4 Rupa and 5 Rupa jhanas?
He's talking about like Brahma Viharas, like own heart and mind.
Limitless expansion of heart-mind. As you think that means Brahma Viharas?
Kind of sounds like it's going in that direction.
I just get really uncomfortable with like limitless expansion of heart-mind because you can mean a million different things by that. And I've also found that about 99% of the time when people think they're getting into, well, even first jhana, let alone anything higher, but especially when they talk about the arupa jhanas, 99% of the time they're just delusional. So especially like limitless expansion of heart-mind until you directly perceive the domain of infinite space and infinite consciousness, and talk to them a bit more and I'm like, oh, you're just spacing out and daydreaming. That's not exactly meditation, that's just spacing out. So yeah, honestly, I think that for the vast majority of people, mindfulness of the body. Don't worry about whether you're getting jhana or not, just mindfulness of the body. So with a still, sharp, clear attention, focus on the sensation of your body. So feeling this heavy, hot, wet mess right here, like this bloody thing right here. Focus on it. Focus on feeling it. And as you stay focused on that, then the mind will naturally enter deeper states of samadhi. You don't need to worry about limitless expansion of heart-mind. That's actually not relevant whatsoever to samadhi practice. You just need to focus on stillness and alertness. That's what's relevant to samadhi practice. Okay. And Seema says, how often does Katina happen at Empty Cloud? After October, will another round of Vasa begin again? Oh, that sounds nice. Also, how do I stop feeling dread, sadness, and anxiety every Sunday before the work week begins? So 2 separate questions here. So does one of you want to talk about Katina and Vasa rules?
That was very easy.
Okay. You want the easy one?
So the Katina ceremony, Katina means solid, right, Bante? Like solid concrete. You can say Katina is that. And the ceremony it's only done at one temple once a year at the end of the Vasa, and only one monastic can receive that Katina robe. So it only happens here, and the Vasa is the rainy retreat, the rains, which only happens also once a year at the beginning of the Indian monsoon season. So these are things that just happen one time, once a year. And to receive the Katina, it's only one monastic at that one monastery at one time, who spent the whole time at that monastery and completed the whole Vasa in that place. So there won't be another one right after.
Okay. And how about how to stop feeling dread, sadness, and anxiety every Sunday before the work week begins? I agree.
Well, the tempting quick answer is give up your job.
Yeah.
But
well,
I don't think that's really.
Yeah.
I think that's the right answer.
You think
Yeah.
that's Fante thinks that's the right answer. I would say at this time though, the first thing to do would be to really pay attention to that. And I tend to feel that decisions come from this kind of degree of mindfulness. So to really feel what you feel on a Sunday night, sit and meditate, and bring up thoughts of the week ahead, and just feel what that's like in the body. What emotions are there? How does it feel in the chest? How does it feel in the belly? And just allow yourself the space. It's very loving. It's very kind to give ourselves this kind of attention, to give attention to the suffering that's there. And in doing that, if you really make space for that, and if you're willing to face it head on in this way, you might notice there may be nuances there. There may be different layers. There may be different issues that will kind of present themselves, and just keep investigating the Dhamma there. And then, the kind of decision around your work, you may actually find that you start to relate to your work in a different way. Your relationship to your work may change in a good way, and you don't need to change anything externally. Or you may feel, actually, there's aspects of this work that are really not meeting my needs, that are really not serving me. Is there any other way I can earn my wages? Is there any other way I can serve in the world? And to see whether those kind of questions come up for you. But first of all, just be with what's present and give it time, give it space, and it will inform you. And let's see what's there, what's really happening there.
Great, thank you. And next we have a question here. Hasenta's asking, where is the story of the monk chanting and becoming a deva? Didn't think there was anywhere the Buddha specifically advised to chant. There's actually more places where the Buddha advised to chant. There's, I only mentioned one case there, but there's actually several others where it's specifically mentioned. And in fact, if by chanting you mean recitation of the suttas, well, that was how the suttas came to us. That was the whole first 500 years or so of Buddhism, was all about people chanting the suttas. So it most certainly was advised. In fact, there's many places where the Buddha would tell the monks, listen carefully and pay attention. In other words, really focus your mind on memorizing this, on remembering this, on holding it in mind, so that it could be recited, remembered and recited. There's many places where the Buddha talks about the benefits of recitation, the benefits of chanting. As for the specific one on the deva, if you send an email to the monastery email account, then I can find the reference for you. I don't remember off the top of my head, but I can find it if you send an email. And Rick is asking, can you share some reflections on times as a monastic that focused more on inner cultivation, and times when you focus more on sharing the Dhamma with others?
Yes. I was telling Bante, and actually we're speaking, I think it was during the allowables time, about how I came into the Dhamma, and when I first ordained, really wanting to practice self-cultivation and really wanting to dedicate, and I did, my time reading the suttas, mostly the four Nikayas over and over and over again, and practicing a lot of meditation. But then my temple is very dedicated towards like helping people, and I would get frustrated, like, okay, I don't mind doing a puja a day, I don't mind doing blessings, but to be doing it over and over and over again, and then doing all these, going out and doing all these kind of serving activities to the community, I noticed that it was really bothering me, and it was really affecting my practice. So then instead of trying to change that, because there wasn't really anything I could do about it, I decided, why don't I make that my practice then? Instead of wanting to practice the way I want to practice, why don't I just practice the way the monks are practicing here? Instead of it just being about me, the Sanatha Vihari Dharma, I had to follow the monastic Dharma instead of my own. And then I noticed like all those things that I was trying to work on in meditation were reducing naturally by doing this other kind of like external practice, So I just it's very interesting how we dichotomize the practice, right? Like this is the real practice, this is the inner cultivation, and this is like ceremony, or this is the external or the social work. But I really see no difference in it, you know? I really see no difference in it. If you really dedicate yourself completely to the practice, always holding to the Buddhist principles, right? Having those principles, everything's going to be embodied, but with the practice, and you won't see any difference. So I think, yes, in the beginning, you know, it's nice to have some time to dedicate to yourself, and then other times sharing the Dhamma. But I think at the end of the day, they're both the same practice, and that's what we need to realize. And if there's any kind of like difficulties there, it's really us just clinging to wanting it our way. Like, this is what I signed up for, and that's not what I signed up for. Meditation off the cushion is not real meditation, right? Walking meditation is not real meditation. Chanting is not real meditation, right? Like prostrations are not real meditation. So we just have to kind of get over that. And in my experience, that only happens by doing it. And only when you do it are you able to see, wow, this is such a beautiful thing, right? So that's just my experience.
Yeah, actually, I really appreciate that thing about how we don't really understand the practice until we do it. What comes to mind for me was actually when I was visiting a monastery in Taiwan, and I didn't know that they were having an Amitabha retreat. So I just showed up at the monastery to stay for a couple of weeks, and I show up and the guest monk is like, congratulations, you get to join the Amitabha retreat. And I was like, the what? The what? No, sweet Jesus, no. But then I was just like, well, I'm here, I might as well do this. And it turned out to be an incredible experience. And I loved it. I actually really, really loved how chanting Amitabha's name over and over throughout the day made the mind so sharp, so joyful, so pure. And so then, like, doing sitting meditation between the periods of chanting, my samadhi was incredibly strong. And there was this sense of like joyful purity in the heart through that practice. But if I had never just kind of accidentally walked into it, I would never have signed up for something like that. So I actually really appreciate you sharing on
Is
that.
there also where you did the bows? Because I remember one time that I came and you were like, oh, this beautiful practice of bowing. You taught us how to do the prostrations according to like the Chinese way.
So it depends on the place. Actually, in Chan retreats, they do this extremely slow bowing sometimes. But in the Amitabha retreat, we also did that. But it was the very slow bowing together with chanting Namo Amitofo. But same thing of like the very slow mindful prostrations, which also I found a really remarkable way of doing mindfulness of the body. But yeah, it's one of those things where like intellectually, it's kind of hard to grasp the power of these things, but then you actually do them and you feel them and you're like, oh, that's what this is doing. How lovely. And okay, so Celestino explains it's from Sutta and the Anguttara Nikaya. Yeah, send an email with the Sutta reference and I'll have a closer look at it. And also Hisanta says, the reason for my cue is I don't understand why chanting isn't in the Eightfold Path itself. But of course it is, just not specifically mentioned. So Dhamma Anusati, recollecting the Dhamma, that builds up right view. Focusing the mind on the chanting, that builds up sati and samadhi. Cultivating the energy to have a pure mind while you chant is samavayama, right effort. So yeah, there's no like samma chanting. It's not like one of these specific 8 items. But chanting nourishes several aspects of the Eightfold Path. So I would say it's definitely a factor. Okay, maybe one for Aya B. This one is from Anthony. It says, is the desire, chanda, discussed in the Iddhipada partly a development of desire for iddhis in addition to desire for wholesome qualities and awakening?
Yeah, I think it is. But this word chanda, yes, refers to wholesome desire generally. And so the desire to practice, the desire to keep the precepts, live a wholesome life, live a harmless life, the desire to purify the heart through practice. And yeah, this desire is necessary. This chanda, this kind of iddhi, this kind of power is necessary for us to make progress in our practice. And so something, yeah, to consider and to develop.
Okay. And that's the last question. So if nothing else appears in the next couple of seconds, then we'll wrap up for the evening. So thank you for all your wonderful questions and this delightful opportunity for Dhamma discussion. And I think we can go ahead and conclude at this time with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll see you all next time.